From Chango, you have myself, Prem Shah, VP of Strategy. And from the Winterberry Group, we have Jonathan Margulies, who's the Managing Director, who I'll be handing the presentation off to shortly. Before we dive in, and for those of you joining us for the first time, I'll provide a quick overview of Chango before we get today's topic started. In a nutshell, Chango is a programmatic advertising platform. We connect marketers with their customers in real time across display, social, mobile, and video. Chango does this in 3 ways. We work with marketers to raise brand awareness, to prospect, which is to acquire new customers, and to retarget existing visitors or high lifetime value customers. As we work towards these goals, our algorithms leverage our proprietary intent data along with first-party and third-party data sets. We score users, and our programmatic decisions about optimization are also made through our algorithms as well. I'm now going to hand off today's presentation to Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Prem, and thanks as well to everyone who's joining us today. I can't think of a more timely and important topic in the worlds of advertising, marketing, and media today than what's happening in the programmatic realm. We've been very, very busy here on our side putting research muscle to untangling some of the mystery that surrounds programmatic, and I'm very happy to spend some time today to share some of what we've learned over the last few months in concert with Chango, a number of other companies, as well as our research partners. For those of you who may not know us, Winterberry Group is a strategy consulting and research firm based in New York. We work primarily with marketers, with marketing service and technology companies, with information providers, and with media companies to help integrate the way that they're using data, technology, and addressable media to either grow their companies or achieve breakthrough performance with their customers and their prospects. We provide corporate strategy assistance to the marketing services and technology sphere, process optimization and data use case development to the marketer world, and we even work with private capital firms, venture capitalists, private equity, and the like to help assess opportunities in the space. Many folks know us through our popular series of white papers and affiliations with industry trade associations, and others know us through our parent company, Petsky-Prunier, one of the leading mergers and acquisition-focused investment banks serving the advertising, media, and information worlds. What I'm going to spend about 20 to 25 minutes talking about, and what we could very, very easily spend another few hours talking about if we really took the research out to its logical conclusion right now, is really a culmination of research and insight that we developed in partnership with the Interactive Advertising Bureau, as well as a roster of sponsors that included Chango over the last few months, and that we published in a white paper entitled Programmatic Everywhere, Data, Technology, and the Future of Audience Engagement just a couple of months ago. What it started with was, I think, a very simple observation that the term programmatic was gaining widespread acceptance, popularity across different disciplines in the media and marketing world. Yet the way people were using the terms differed pretty substantially. In some quarters, programmatic was a euphemism for real-time bidding, a media buying technology or technique, if you will, that sought to match buyers and sellers of ad inventory in the most optimal fashion. For other people, programmatic represented a new strategic approach to marketing and customer engagement across different channels, essentially an evolution of the way that they've been practicing campaigns traditionally. And others were using programmatic to refer to a wide assortment or an array of different approaches to both advertising and to customer engagement. What we sought to do was to both conclusively determine what programmatic is, to set out and identify a set of use cases that would be addressable to it, if not necessarily today, then certainly over the next few years, and then begin to chart our impressions of where we thought programmatic was, and at the end of the day, where the programmatic opportunity is for advertisers and media companies, with the goal of really sort of resolving this one big question. Is programmatic everywhere? And if it is, or even if it's not, what has to happen in these worlds in order for it to ultimately come to lead the way that we harness the value of data apply it to media, and use it to drive actual tangible results in our marketing interactions. I think that practically speaking today, the origins of what we know of as programmatic go back to the beginning of display advertising, or really any advertising on the internet altogether. And so to really understand programmatic, you need to go back to 1994. You need to go to that first banner advertisement, a spot for AT&T that ran on hotwire.com, to get a sense for how ad technology and marketing process innovations have really evolved over the years. It seems to me, we've observed both in our consulting work and our research, that every 2-3 years or so, since that first ad appeared on the scene, there's been a series of sort of step-level innovations that have variously promised to unlock a new era of marketing possibility, and with it, untold value for whomever would come along to be their best practitioners over the years. It started perhaps with the banner itself, but over the years it progressed to techniques in media like search, the coming of ad networks to aggregate all sorts of different inventory, and close on its heels, real-time bidding, really the first sort of formation of what we think of today as programmatic, a means to actually access inventory across a range of different media platforms in real time according to the demand and the supply dynamics of a given industry. And then following up on that, innovations in video and social media, mobile platforms that were attuned to taking advantage of technology to follow consumers wherever they would be. And then just following up on that, the demand and supply side platforms, and finally the data management platforms that offered and offer, I should say, the opportunity, allow advertisers the access to the right advertising in front of the right audiences at the right times, and likewise the ability to harness that raw information about who those audiences are into such a means that provide for the creation of actionable insight. And that is to say, data not just for its own sake, but data for the sake of making better business decisions, better decisions about what media to buy, what kind of messaging to place on those media, and what the right tenor, cadence of that messaging is for different audiences in order to maximize business results. So if you live in the world of ad tech, or you're an advertiser yourself, or even a publisher, you understand that staying on top of these innovations, making sure that you're capitalizing on the best of technology, but also the best when it comes to understanding how process needs to support that, is really table stakes for living today as a successful marketer. And what you've also probably learned over the years in seeing these innovations unfold is that there's a series of sort of truisms that now define what it means to be best in class in the marketing world. The first and foremost I think of them is the recognition that technology is central to the practice of marketing, not just because machines and algorithms and gadgets of any sort ultimately translate to marketing success, but that they can and they should empower automation. They should allow us to take costly, time-consuming, and challenging human processes out of the flow of advertising placement wherever they can, and allow us to reorient or retask those human resources, which at the end of the day drive the real strategic value in this enterprise towards higher level functions. On concert with that, there's a growing understanding that when we talk about engagement in the advertising world, when people talk about how to elevate marketing from something that's about one-time only campaign execution to something that's all about driving long-term value of a customer or a prospect, the focal point, the object of that engagement shouldn't be the channel. We shouldn't be living to optimize the way we practice digital advertising any more than we practice TV or email or direct mail or print advertising for that matter. Instead, what you hear a lot about is customer centricity, about putting the audience at the center of how we practice media, being responsive to their needs based upon what we can learn about them. And finally, natural extension of that, data at the end of the day represents the proxy for who that audience is. And the more data that we can create, can collect, I should say, and ultimately the more insight we can create from that disparate set of data from many different sources across many channels, many potential platforms, ultimately has the potential to drive greater value for those who can create, like I say, actionable insight and really wisdom from that information. So the pressures on the modern marketer and the modern publisher are trifold. Automate where you can, be customer-centric, audience-centric, and constantly work to leverage data to create actionable insight, actionable wisdom that allows you to be more nimble, more responsive to their needs. And that leads us straight into the definition of programmatic as we see it today. For some, programmatic, like I said before, is all about that automation. In some quarters, programmatic is all about real-time bidding, the approach to capturing access to different kinds of advertising inventory, particularly those that whose transaction isn't brokered directly by a media salesperson and a buyer representing a brand or an agency. And that would be correct to an extent. I mean, automation and the technologies that enable it really is the centerpiece of how programmatic is practiced today. Without those techniques, after all the good business process and all the good strategic thinking in the world won't be going anywhere fast. But I think as we think about this more broadly, and as we think about programmatic marketing being something that really is broader and has the potential to drive more value than simply automated media buying, we need to think about it as the integration of that automation with business strategy, insight, and rules development upstream. Essentially, how can I make our advertising and our marketing execution function responsive to the needs of the business? How can we integrate it more deeply with the business strategies and the product strategies that are defining how we go to market? Today, predominantly, the programmatic marketing use cases that are the most mature, that have gained the most acceptance, and that are setting the standard for how this approach is really going to be practiced across media, have got their start in the media world, because that is where the most substantial opportunity originally was to capture efficiencies and value in a world where there was nothing but chaos and complexity previously. So when we talk about things like real-time bidding, what we're talking about is the creation of an automated auction-based environment for the transaction of digital advertising on the basis not necessarily of the ad property itself, but on the basis of who the audience member is, or who, better yet, who we expect the audience member to be based upon a series of data points that we can measure. Today, that's the most mature of the programmatic use cases, but it's not the only one, and nor is it even the only one in the media world, where savvy marketers and technology companies have been rapidly advancing on that to do more in closed auction environments, effectively deploying the programmatic approach and technology to transactions that have been previously thought of as premium, that is to say, brokered directly between salespeople and buyers. Likewise, the same programmatic approach to automation, to auction-based buying, and to the integration of data into insight, into action, is increasingly being used to support marketing functions that are complementary to advertising. That is to say, the optimization of content across a variety of different touch points, not just the display ad, but also the captive website, the mobile application, other sorts of owned media, social media in the earned realm, and even media that aren't digital necessarily, media such as direct mail and other trigger-based platforms that, like that display ad itself, rely on an input and understanding of who the audience member is likely to be in order to drive an optimal messaging and an offer scenario. Programmatic, depending on where you sit in the ecosystem, really simply refers to the automation of these processes that were once manual, the integration of strategy more deeply into how it's practiced, and the development of a marketing and advertising capability that is continuous. That is to say, it is always on, it is always responsive to these inputs, to these data points, given a set of pre-established business rules, and it is less beholden to the constraints of the campaign, a once-in-time event, as we've traditionally understood them. We went out and we surveyed several hundred senior thought leaders in the advertising and media worlds to get a sense of how they're practicing programmatic, how much real activity is happening today compared to, say, the hype that you might sense in the market. And the results that we heard back, I think, were extremely telling. First and foremost, to sort of address that very first question, sort of right in the title of our research, is programmatic really everywhere? The answer, I think, clearly is yes or almost yes. 85% of our advertiser panelists, for example, said they're practicing some form of programmatic media buying today. 72% of our publisher respondents said the same thing. There's not a whole lot of room to grow off of numbers quite so robust, but nonetheless, when we asked the same panelists to sort of fast forward a couple of years and project what they're working towards, even higher numbers said that they're going to be there. 91% of advertisers, 83% of publishers. In short, though their use cases vary, though their levels of maturity vary pretty substantially across different verticals and segments, the interest in programmatic is there. And a realization that there's value implicit in this approach is growing, I think, by the day. Now, why people are investing in programmatic and what they hope to capture from the effort varies pretty significantly. And this is one of the more surprising findings we took from the research. I think in some quarters, particularly those that are more traditionally media-focused, transactional-focused, one of the early criticisms of the approach was that it represented potentially nothing more than an attempt among advertisers to buy certain types of digital media at the absolute lowest price that they absolutely can. That as much as they wanted to potentially expand their reach or capture more value, it really was a race to the bottom in terms of being able to drive down media prices by leveraging those efficiencies that were enabled by automation. The fact of the matter is that when we went out and we asked publishers and advertisers respectively to tell us what interested them the most about programmatic, the tables were turned a bit. Advertisers, when they listed their motives, their most important motive was efficiency, was effectiveness, I should say. That is to say, their ability to get in front of the right target audience, the right offer, at the right time, sort of the very old-fashioned, why do you advertise? It's to drive sales, it's to drive revenue, and ultimately profitability. And that's why they're investing in programmatic. Publishers, by contrast, the folks who you might think would otherwise be the most threatened by what automation could do to their media prices, they're looking at the approach as something that has the ability to drive efficiency, to improve their ability to deliver specific audiences to their advertisers, to improve the turnaround time for advertising processing, back-end operations, and the like, effectively to be more efficient in how they package and how they sell audiences and advertising to their primary customers, and how they go about their own marketing as well as marketers themselves. Publishers are all marketers at the end of the day likewise. I thought this was particularly telling and perhaps a sign of real progress, real evolution in the entire practice over just a few years. Today, to a great extent, though, even though, as I've referred to a few times, and as we'll talk a little bit more about in a couple of minutes, there's a huge array of potential use cases that are addressable to programmatic. When most people use the term, when most people talk about it, they really are talking about a combination of that basic machine-driven automation. That is to say, the utilization of technologies to drive real-time or at least right-time media transactions between buyer and seller, taking out much of the costly manual processes between them, and simply the practice of real-time bidding in its own right. The utilization of a sort of lights-out auction-based mechanism to support the transaction of typically lower value media in the transaction process. For most people, that's what it is. But what we've likewise determined, and what I think most of our panels were most excited about, wasn't so much that this is where programmatic is today, so much as the fact that the span of addressable use cases, both squarely focused on advertising and complementary to it, still part of the marketing sphere, is pretty substantial looking down the road. Already today, the IAB, our research partner in the endeavor, working through their programmatic council, has identified as many as 4 and potentially more specific kinds of media transactional use cases that are prevalent in the market today. And kind of look at each of these 4 along the rows here, and what they really reflect is different levels of complexity and involvement relating to the number of buyers and sellers that are party to a transaction. When we think about RTB, an open auction environment where as many buyers are welcome to come in and place bids on as much inventory as a seller chooses to put on the marketing, that represents the centerpiece of RTB, but it's not the only one, clearly. Increasingly, media companies are investing in different forms of auctions with closed environments, that is to say environments where they're inviting only one or only several potential bidders to come and bid for media, and likewise in different environments where they're setting price ceilings and price floors that are pre-negotiated in a non-automated environment, that are essentially brokered by sales teams and other human parties, if you will, to the transaction. Essentially, in those cases, attempting to leverage automation benefits where they stand to deliver the most value, while leveraging their very, very valuable human resources to uphold the value of the brand, the content, and the audience, protecting value where it can do the most good as well. When we look down the road, as I say, it's more than those media use cases, though. It's a wide variety of different strategic marketing use cases that folks have told us they're most excited about. So something as simple as just audience segmentation. That is to say, leveraging a programmatic platform in order to learn more about who an audience is, segment that audience into actionable segments so that you can develop a tactical execution plan that's appropriate. Huge growth potential. 79% of our panelists said that's the foundation of how they practice programmatic today, but that number will be going to 91% in just a few years. Likewise, we asked about just basic insight development. Can you leverage a programmatic foundation to simply learn about your audience, learn about the media environment, collect research to aid in how you craft offers, but also, I think critically, how you build products for the marketplace. Today, 63%, a majority, but perhaps not an overwhelming majority, of programmatic practitioners are leveraging those platforms as a research input. 2 years, 88% of the same panel expect that they'll be doing the same. Essentially, what we're building is an infrastructure not just to enable efficiencies via advertising automation. We're building a platform that allows us to understand our customers better and ultimately make better business decisions up and down the value chain. To the same end, content optimization. When we think about the kinds of creative that are embedded in advertising, when we think about the selection of offer, message, tailored to potentially individual audience segments or individual audience members in some cases, huge value and huge potential inherent there as well. Today, not quite a majority, just 47% of advertisers and publishers are leveraging their programmatic tools to optimize that content in real time for individual audience segments. But we're going to reach a tipping point there soon if we haven't already, bearing in mind that our research here is now about 3 months old. In 2 years, 69% of panelists expect that they'll be doing themselves. Essentially, that the notion that dynamic learning, data collection, creation of insight, and like I said, the creation of that actionability from the insight should impact every part of the advertising cycle, every work stream, is coming to gain widespread acceptance. So what may have traditionally been thought of, as I've said a couple times now, as simply a transactional automation mechanism is increasingly going to come to impact how we're able to interact with customers and build an engagement with them over time that should drive higher lifetime value in those relationships. Needless to say, though, there are a number of concerns and potentially a number of barriers that have in the past slowed down the pace of investment and the pace of innovation, and may well continue to do the same to a certain extent going down the road. What we expected to hear, this is another case where perhaps some of the research surprised us when it came back. One of the sort of legacy concerns we've heard is that internal resistance, that is to say, certainly on the media side, sales teams throwing up barriers to programmatic because they saw it as a direct threat to the way they practice their livelihoods. Advertisers, strategic marketers throwing up resistance perhaps on the demand side because they see this approach as being something that threatens the thoughtfulness and the carefulness of their craft. Actually didn't register as much as a concern to anybody at all. Just over a quarter of panelists said that resistance from the human process owners, from managers, from functional teams in their own organization was meaningfully impacting the practice of programmatic today, far less than we actually expected would register. By contrast, and I think that this number is important, advertisers express some concern around brand safety and around the notion of allowing advertising and other types of messaging, both on their own properties and out on third parties, to perhaps appear in contextually inappropriate areas when too much of the process was being managed automatically. Not such a tremendous concern that it would meaningfully inhibit their investment, and certainly not the kind of concern we heard in multiple interviews that would thwart continued innovation, especially given the number of brand safety solutions, compliance solutions that are coming on the market, both from agencies and through dedicated technology platforms. But important enough that the industry has woken up and taken note, and important enough likewise that more marketers and more publishers today are thinking very, very critically about this issue in concert with data governance, data stewardship, and responsible engagement practices as it relates to both their advertising publisher partners and certainly as it relates to how they collect, share, and manage data across their enterprise. Going down the road as I attempt to put a bow on some of this, like I said, there are literally hours and hours of material and analysis we could choose to review. We think programmatic's evolution will be marked by 5 developing trends. Not so much future trends, as they are trends that we're already seeing begin to take hold across different quarters and are really just going to, I think, accelerate in adoption pace over the next few years. If you haven't yet had an opportunity to pick up our white paper, it'd be a great opportunity to do so because we go into quite a bit of detail on each of these there. But I'll briefly note that with data sort of being the centerpiece of the programmatic enterprise, and cookies, the traditional mechanism for capturing and transferring data in the pure digital environment, not being appropriate for the most part for utilization on mobile devices, we think alternate methods of data collection, transfer, audience recognition are going to be critical if we're ultimately going to make programmatic applicable across different media. And really that cross-channel, that omni-channel addressability, I think is essential to the practice of programmatic to begin with. Just as we need to think customer-centric first and foremost rather than channel-centric, we need to be able to address and meet that audience member, that customer's needs wherever they happen to be. We know they're increasingly on mobile and tablet devices. We know they split their time and their attention between different devices and platforms at any given time. It's incumbent upon the marketer and the publisher to be where they are. So increasingly, I think that programmatic technology in those platforms will come to support different media seamlessly. It's important for the marketer to think about how their business processes, how their incentive structures, and the like align with that. I hit on this very, very quickly, but data is increasingly the fuel that makes programmatic operate, and the the critical and very, very valuable corporate asset that must be safeguarded if any of this is to work and any of it is to drive real value going down the road. We see enterprise-level data governance, data stewardship strategies beginning to really grow in prominence in the organization. The role of chief data officer is something I think we can all expect to see in many companies over the next few years, and coming with it a set of discrete practices, policies, best practices, both industry-wide and specific to individual organizations, that will attempt to both safeguard but also promote the use and the value of data over time. Processes to support all of the above are critical. All the best thinking and all the best investment in technology and tools and talent won't accomplish much of all if the internal business isn't structured to do it, and if we aren't tasking individuals in the organization to support that kind of utilization. And finally, last but certainly not least, if you haven't noticed it already, the technology world is evolving extremely quickly to support this. They see the value, they see the interest among marketers, and the need to deliver programmatic solutions that are absolutely fundamentally tuned to both the opportunity inherent in this kind of technology, but also the need to grow value of the customer relationship and deliver real meaningful value to those customers so that they'll engage, they'll share, they'll interact, and they'll support the transformation so that it's there on both sides of the equation. There is much more to learn, and we'll take a few questions in just a minute about these topics or others connected to it. If you'd like to connect with me directly, my contact information is right here on the screen. I'm more than happy to take specific questions either about the research or about our practice, research and strategy-wise. And finally, if you'd like to download the paper, it's available now and for free at chango.com/resources if you want to do some background reading. For now, I've been talking for a while. I'm going to send the mic back to Prem, and we'll take some questions that may have popped up during the last half hour.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was great insight for all of us. That concludes our Programmatic Everywhere webinar for today. For those of you on the call, as Jonathan mentioned, you can download the white paper at chango.com/resources. Please do download a copy, as there's probably a lot more interesting insight within that document as well. Also, just a reminder that a copy of the deck and the recording will be sent to all attendees within the next 24 to 48 hours. So you'll have a copy of that as well. For those of you who can remain on the call, I do know that we're about 2 minutes over. But for those of you who can remain on the call, we'll now do some Q&A. And thanks again for everyone for joining. So Jonathan, we had a question here. The question was, what are publishers doing to generate demand for private auction deals? For example, who are publishers reaching out to discuss private deals?
So I think there are potentially a myriad of different answers to that question, and the activity and the emphasis that we see spans a lot of different approaches. The most activity actually hasn't so much been on how do they reach out to different advertisers potentially in order to broker these deals. I think the first generation of programmatic transformation on the media side has been all about establishing the infrastructure and the process internally to allow sales teams to support programmatic to begin with, essentially establishing rules of the road internally so that sales team knows when a deal is appropriate for programmatic execution and when it's something that may be more appropriate for a traditional approach to media, something more driven by, let's say, the brand, complete site takeover, something like that. What more organizations, especially the bigger media companies, are coming to realize is that the distinctions between what's appropriate for traditional and programmatic are perhaps less stark than they were originally thinking about. So educating those sales teams around the programmatic opportunity has been a real focal point. And then working with their premium, their largest advertisers to identify these opportunities jointly has been on the radar screen in almost all organizations that we've encountered thus far. The point is really identifying where insight into a specific audience for a given product for a given type of campaign or messaging strategy is appropriate. That's something that a machine can't do on its own. That's something that really does require a strategic salesperson, a strategic product manager, to put their heads together and determine, well, let's identify the audience dynamics, let's identify the business drivers, and then we'll work together to find a pricing and a placement strategy that the programmatic infrastructure can support. Across enterprise media in particular, and I expect to a great extent over the next few years across what some have called the long tail of the media industry, we'll begin to see more of this. The good news is that there's been so much hype and so much conversation around the programmatic opportunity for an advertiser that the sales pitch hasn't been terribly difficult in a lot of cases. Advertisers want to buy on the basis of audience. Advertisers, as the research I think proved out, want to be effective in their messaging. And so if the media companies can put together a nice package of different offerings that offer that opportunity to connect with individual audience members, to engage individual segments where they can drive the most value, while at the same time supporting their broader brand priorities where that may be appropriate, that really is a very, very compelling offer that doesn't require pulling of teeth, if you will, in order to gain acceptance. And we're seeing quite a bit of that.
Excellent. Thanks, Jonathan. We have another question here. How are advertisers scaling asset development to create consumer-centric messaging?
Scaling app development to create consumer-centric messaging?
No, it was scaling asset development.
Okay. So likewise, a number of different approaches here. In one hand, this is I think an opportunity for their agency partners to be particularly deeply involved in this programmatic evolution. There are two approaches here if we want to simplify it dramatically. One is more variation, more versioning, more granularity in creative and offer development means that potentially a designer, either at the agency or in-house, could spend more hours churning out more different iterations of a given message. The other approach to it, which some have begun developing, leveraging a combination of existing and emerging tools, is to embed more dynamic customization elements into creative content itself, so that the creative is just as addressable to the programmatic approach as the placement of that message itself. Different elements, some rather sophisticated, more than changing a background from blue to red, but changing the entire look and feel and content of a given piece to match what we know about an audience member. Agencies, I think, are in a unique position to help their clients understand more about how to leverage both or certainly one of those independent types based upon the dynamics of their campaign. What we know for sure that it's going to require is it's going to require a series of dynamic optimization tools that make it possible, because the creative needs to be responsive to the audience. First and foremost, I think we've determined that pretty conclusively if any of this is going to work. But they, typically sitting in the seat of having at least supported the strategic development of the program, certainly done a lot of the creative iteration and later development, also should be in a place where they can support this hybrid programmatic traditional execution where it's appropriate. Now the span of different maturity among practitioners out there in the marketplace today is really, really broad. So you see some cases, especially in the enterprise realm, if you will, where the sophistication, the partnership between the advertiser and their client, between dynamic content, static content, manually generated versions and the like, is dynamic, fluid, and I guess you could say optimal, and in many cases where this is a case-by-case basis, we're still sort of feeling our way. But I think when you take this idea, this development, this opportunity out further. Needless to say, the tools are getting better. They're supporting dynamic content much more fundamentally. I think that smart agencies will look at programmatic as an opportunity to really run wild as it comes to different kinds of creative formats, to get much more imaginative, much more impactful in how they're creating content for audiences, and to put their best foot forward, taking advantage of what their technology peers are making possible.
Excellent. That was great insight, Jonathan. And we're now going to take our last question, given that we're about at 1:40 p.m. Jonathan, the last question here is, can you share your thoughts about connecting programmatic/RTB advertising with native? How can RTB shake hands with native when the definition of a successful native campaign is one in which it has been uniquely created in conjunction with specific content? By enabling programmatic/RTB to pair with that scenario, don't you lose efficacy?
Well, so that sort of rolls back to your core definition of what programmatic is to a certain extent. If programmatic is to you RTB, and that's all it is, then its specific value with respect to native may, in fact, to your point, be somewhat limited, because at the end of the day, native is all about contextual appropriateness, owning the content environment in both a very, very traditional paid context, but also what might be thought of as earned, even though it's really paid as well. And perhaps they're of lesser value. If, on the other hand, we think about programmatic more broadly, if we think about it as any kind of mechanism that allows for continuous audience engagement, that allows for the optimization of content placement, content message across any channel, and any particular type of content, again, paid, earned, or owned, then the opportunity to integrate native into the workflow, I think, actually is meaningful. Native is really this unique hybrid of what is thought of as, at least displays as paid and earned content. It can be optimized and ought to be optimized first and foremost by what we know about the audience member. And I think ultimately you can see a point where people are investing in native on that basis. If it's open auction, on the other hand, if it's simply about attempting to extract the performance efficiencies with less regard for the strategic impact of that media down the road, then I think the spread and the potential value to be seen here is somewhat lesser. But if we think about native as just one other kind of engagement approach, one other kind of medium, then certainly the opportunity to optimize it is just as great, if not greater, than that applies to any other format.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jonathan. For everyone that joined, these are great questions. Thank you very much for asking them and encouraging more thinking around Programmatic Everywhere. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you again for joining. We will send out a copy of the deck and the presentation within the next 24 to 48 hours. And a special thanks to Jonathan and the Winterberry Group. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Please stand by.